You know, when you're building the software that runs a fighter jet or a satellite or even a nuclear submarine, good enough just isn't, well, good enough. It's a recipe for absolute disaster. We're talking about huge, mission critical projects where failure just isn't an option. So, how on earth do you manage that level of complexity and risk? Well, that's where this landmark set of rules comes in: Military Standard 498, a framework literally designed to tame chaos.
And that really is the central question, isn't it? It's the thing that keeps engineers and project managers up at night. When lives and, national security are on the line, you can't just ship it and patch it later. You need a system, a process, a rule book that makes sure from day one that the project is on track, on budget, and built to withstand anything. This is the world that gave us Mil Standard 498. So at the heart of any of these massive projects, you've really got two main players. There's the acquirer, think the Department of Defense, and then there's the developer, the contractor who's actually building the software. The acquirer needs to know without a doubt that the project is under control and that they're going to get what they paid for. Meanwhile, the developer just needs to know exactly what to build. This setup creates this natural tension, and without a common language or a shared set of rules, things can go sideways fast. Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by looking at the kind of chaos that existed before this standard. Then we'll introduce Mil Standard 498 as the rule book designed to fix all that. We'll dive into its focus on documentation, the power of paper, so to speak, and then look at how it managed all the moving parts, both human and technical. And finally, we'll talk about the legacy it left behind. So let's start by jumping in our time machine and heading back to a time before a single unified standard existed. The world of big-time software development, well, it was kind of the Wild West. The industry was facing what a lot of people were calling the software crisis. Projects were just constantly bogged down by vague requirements, which led to endless changes, budgets that just exploded, and deadlines that flew right by. Different contractors were all using their own methods, which made trying to get them to work together a complete nightmare. It was like trying to build a skyscraper where every single team had a totally different blueprint. The risk of failure wasn't just a business problem anymore. It was a serious national security risk. Something had to change. And that something was Military Standard 498. Now, it wasn't the very first attempt to solve this problem, but it was a groundbreaking effort to create a single, all-encompassing framework. So what was this thing exactly? Released back in 1994, MilStan 498 was created to replace this whole patchwork of older, sometimes contradictory standards. The goal was to create one unified playbook for how the Department of Defense would buy and manage software. And it covered the whole shebang, from brand new development to maintenance and even re-engineering old systems. Now, hold on, because here's where we need to bust a huge myth. A lot of people hear military standard and they immediately think of a super rigid, step-by-step waterfall process. But that's the complete opposite of what this was about, and the standard says so itself. It was a framework for what needed to get done, things like planning, documenting, and testing, but it gave the developer total freedom to decide how to do it. So if the standard wasn't about a specific method, what was its core philosophy? Well, you could sum it up in one word: documentation. It was built on the simple but powerful principle of writing everything down. And the main way they enforced this was with a set of templates called Data Item Descriptions, or DIDs for short. You can think of these as super detailed checklists for every single critical document a project needed. The idea was to make sure nothing was ever left to guesswork. And the scope of this was just enormous. Seriously, there was a DITA for everything. The software development plan, that was the master plan for the whole project. The system specification laid out the high-level goals. The software requirements spec got into all the nitty-gritty details. The design description showed how it was all going to be built. Every single phase of development had a document to go with it, all to ensure total clarity and accountability. But here's another little detail that might surprise you. Documentation didn't just mean dusty binders sitting on a shelf. Remember, this standard was written in 1994, but it was incredibly forward-thinking. The requirement to record information explicitly said that this included digital records in things like case tools, that's computer-aided software engineering, and project management software. It was about the information itself, not the paper it was printed on. Okay, so the standard created a crystal clear paper trail, but it was also about managing the people and the process in real time. It forced a level of discipline and communication that, frankly, was often missing before. A really crucial piece of this was how it handled problems.
MIL Standard 498 demanded what it called a closed-loop corrective action system. What does that mean? It means every single problem, no matter how small, had to be formally reported, acted on, resolved, and then tracked until it was officially closed. The bottom line was nothing could fall through the cracks. It created a real culture of accountability.
It also forced everyone to collaborate. The standard required regular joint management reviews that put the acquirer and the developer in the same room. And this wasn't just a casual status update. It was a formal process to guarantee constant communication, to hammer out technical issues, and, this is critical, to make sure the people with the actual authority to make decisions on cost and schedule were right there. And to make sure those reviews were actually useful, the standard pushed for using objective data through what it called candidate management indicators, by tracking things like how many requirements were changing or how staffing levels compared to the original plan. It shifted the conversation away from, so how do you feel it's going, to, okay, what does the data say? Now, Milstead 498 itself was officially replaced back in 1998, but its influence is far from over. Let's talk about the impact it's had that we still see today. One of its most important contributions was just creating a common vocabulary. It took terms from older standards like DoD-Stand 2167A and it consolidated them. Now, that might sound like a small thing, but getting everyone on these massive multi-contractor projects to speak the same language was a huge step in cutting down confusion and getting people to work together effectively. And really, this is the ultimate takeaway. While you won't see many new contracts referencing MIL Standard 498 today, its DNA is absolutely everywhere. Those core principles, defining clear requirements, keeping detailed documentation, using structured management, that's the bedrock of modern systems engineering. You can even see its DNA in today's scaled agile frameworks, which, just like those old military projects, have to find ways to manage complexity across hundreds or even thousands of developers. So I'll just leave you with this question. In a world that is completely obsessed with speed and moving fast and iterating, what can we learn from a standard that valued discipline, clarity, and getting it right the first time? The tools have definitely changed, but that fundamental challenge of taming complexity, that remains exactly the same.